Hello, I am Ramón Nogueras. This is Ángel Sucasas, and we have the honor and the pleasure of having with us Miss Rhianna Pratchett, who's lead writer for many important video games, very well-known video games as Tomb Raider, Overlord, or Mirror's Edge, and we will have the opportunity of interviewing her for the next hour and know a bit more about her work and everything surrounding writing for video games.
Hola, soy Ramón Nogueras y él es Ángel Sucasas y hoy tenemos la oportunidad de entrevistar durante esta mañana a Rhianna Pratchett, que como sabéis es la guionista de muchísimos videojuegos muy conocidos como Tomb Raider, como Overlord o como Mirror's Edge. Y la vamos a entrevistar durante la próxima hora y aquí me permito añadir que mis labores serán de turnarme de vez en cuando con las preguntas con Ramón y las de intentar traducir lo mejor que pueda a Rhianna y a las preguntas que le hagamos. Y que la haréis vosotros también, claro. Voy a hacerle la primera pregunta a Rhianna. So, my first question for you, Rhianna, is that if you can enlighten us about what came first for you in your childhood, books or games, and what sort of books did you like and what sort of video games?
I think books came first, definitely, because my parents read to me at an early age, and I learnt to read as well at an early age. And I was always reading books, and I was always reading books in little hidey holes and up trees. I think that was one of my favourite things to do, was to read books up trees, or go outside and find a little hidey hole in the rain. I had this. My parents had a wood pile that was made up of. They had some old barrel pieces, and I used to sort of build a hidey hole in the wood pile from old bits of barrel and read in there when it was raining. That was my favourite thing to do. So I've always been reading, and my parents, obviously thought that was very important to me. And my mum would never get me sweets; she'd always get me books or comics when I was a kid. So, yeah, I grew up reading a lot. But I got into games quite early as well, around about 6 years old, I think. And that was, thanks to Dad being into electronics and kind of robotics and computers, and sort of getting into gaming early as well.
Bueno, pues primero fueron los libros, es lo que primero recuerdo de mi formación en ficción, fueron los libros. Me gustaba muchísimo leer en lugares extraños, como metida en un hueco o en lo alto de un árbol. De hecho, mis padres tenían como una especie, habían montado en la finca como una especie de armazón o de guarida en la que a mí me encantaba leer. Tanto mi padre como mi madre creían que era algo muy importante para mí, entonces no dejaban de darme cómics y libros para que yo leyera, y mi tiempo favorito, mis momentos favoritos los pasaba leyendo. Pero con los juegos también empecé muy pronto, a los 6 años, y bueno, esa relación con los juegos pues también ha influido en mi relación con la electrónica, con la tecnología y con lo que acabaría siendo mi profesión, ¿no?
Writing a book is very different from writing for a video game. In a book you have unlimited freedom, you can write whatever you want, in any way you want. But I would like for you to explain us which are the constraints you find, the limitations you have when writing for a video game. What comes first, the story of the video game or the game and then wrapping a story around it, so to speak?
Well, almost always the game comes first, the gameplay comes first. That's kind of what makes it a game, and it's kind of what has to come first. So unlike any other entertainment media, they're just books, TV, film, they're all story-led. Games are not story-led, usually. Certainly with some genres, adventure games, role-playing games, they tend to have some elements that are story-led, but the developers are probably developing story and gameplay at the same time, which is the ideal, really, because gameplay has to support story and story has to support gameplay. Do you want me to give you pauses to translate? Okay. And so it's always the game first, and actually that's something that a lot of writers coming in from other entertainment media don't really know about. Like that they think, okay, I'll have a great idea for a video game. It's like, let me stop you there. That's not kind of how it works. Like in film, you can put together a spec script or a pitch, and you can take that to people. That's not how things work in games with writers, unless the writer happens to be a very high-level designer as well. But that's sort of fairly rare. So most of the time, the stories for games are generated within the developers themselves, within the publishers, and then writers are either there from the beginning. If you're talking about teams like BioWare or Obsidian or Telltale, any of the big storytelling studios, or they'll hire a writer like me at some point during the development. If you're lucky, it will be a couple of years from shipping the game. If you're very unlucky, it will be 6 months before the game ships.
Bueno, pues en los videojuegos la jugabilidad, el gameplay siempre viene primero, ¿no? Tal vez este sea de todos los medios que incluyen narración, de todos los medios narrativos, el único que no está impulsado o cuyo motor no es la historia, ¿no? El gameplay es lo que viene primero, así que salvo en géneros como el rol o las aventuras en los que comparten un poco el liderazgo, en general el gameplay va primero, aunque yo creo que lo ideal sería que gameplay e historia funcionaran a la vez, ¿no? El trabajo de un escritor en un videojuego es muy distinto, es decir, tú no puedes, se te ocurre una idea y tú no puedes decir, pues tengo una idea genial para un videojuego, a partir de aquí vamos a trabajarla, ¿no? No se trabaja de esa manera, no es el guionista el que acude a un productor o a un publisher con un pitch y le vende esa idea, salvo que el guionista sea también un diseñador del más alto nivel, ¿no? Lo que te puede pasar cuando trabajas en un videojuego, pues depende del tipo de compañía para el que trabajes. Si trabajas para una compañía como BioWare o Telltale, lo que te vas a encontrar es que los guionistas están desde el primer momento en el videojuego. Sin embargo, si te pasa como me ha pasado a mí, te contratan como guionista del videojuego cuando el desarrollo ya está en marcha. Y si tienes suerte, esto te ocurre 2 años antes de que el videojuego se tenga que entregar, y si tienes mala suerte, pues solo contarás con 6 meses para escribir la historia.
Okay, so you have to write under heavy constraints, but anyway, we guess that you have some sort of freedom regarding, for example, how you portrait your characters. I would like to ask you about the reimagining of Lara Croft. Okay, I really enjoyed the reboot of Tomb Raider, and we have a new Tomb Raider game now. And what wanted you to achieve with this reimagining of the character, because it's very different from previous Lara, and I think it's for the best. What did you want to achieve with this new Lara Croft character?
Well, she's different in some ways, but similar in others. I think we've kept a lot of the traits that people associate with Lara, such as her strength, her tenacity, her resourcefulness, her bravery. That is still in place with new Lara, and that was always a part of classic Lara. Obviously, the look was changed. And made a little bit kind of more realistic and less cartoony than it had been in certain incarnations in the past. But we also wanted to explore her before she became the Tomb Raider, like sort of what led up to that. And so we were taking those traits that we associated and everyone associated with the Tomb Raider, and then kind of rewinding them to the point where they were sort of being tested for the first time and kind of bubbling to the surface. So I think Crystal had been contacted a lot about doing a game involving a younger Lara Croft and kind of her adventures. So they knew there was an appetite out there for it. And yeah, they were just very interested in exploring the sort of, the pre-Tomb Raiding times, and kind of showing her on the path to becoming the Tomb Raider. And that was all about what the first game You know, she's fighting for survival. You know, it's a very reactive game. She's seeing all these things for the first time. She's having her eyes open to the world. You know, she's 21. She's just out of university. She thinks she knows everything, like you do when you're just out of university and think you're ready for the world. And you know, the whole game is basically you are not ready for the world, Lara Croft, and you know, she has to sort of make herself ready. And so by the time Rise comes around, she's more proactive. She's actively seeking secrets and mysteries of the world, and she's sort of much more willing to kind of fight fire with fire as you know, as far as kind of enemies and combat. She's kind of tougher. She's had some adventures in the comics as well, which took place in between the first and the second game. So, you know, her character evolution was definitely something we saw occurring across a number of games, and it wasn't just, you know, something we did in the first game. That was just, you know, the first step on her character arc, and we wanted to make sure that she kept changing and evolving. And I think the second game is subtler. It's much more sort of an internal, you know, she kind of changes much more on the inside than the outside, and but the her external struggles are much more obvious in the first game, and she's still going through internal struggles as well. But it's very the kind of physical challenges that she's going through are very kind of new to her in the first game. But the second, she's toughened to them, so it's much more kind of what's happening psychologically with her.
Bueno, pues la pregunta era un poco que Rhianna nos contara cómo había reimaginado a Lara Croft y bueno, cuáles fueron los puntos principales de ese cambio en el personaje. Y lo primero que nos ha dicho Rhianna es que Lara Croft en realidad ha cambiado en algunas cosas, pero en otras ha permanecido igual. Hay unas características como son su valentía, como son su tenacidad, como son su fuerza para afrontar los problemas que tienen, que se han mantenido exactamente igual en esta reencarnación. Lo que ha cambiado, y esto es algo que digamos que han desarrollado con la intención de tener un personaje que se desarrolla durante varios juegos y no solo en un título, es que a Lara la cogemos mucho antes. Crystal Dynamics decidió que había una buena oportunidad para coger a una Lara más joven, y entonces la Lara que nos encontramos pues es un poco como la persona que sale de la universidad, ¿no? Que todavía no está preparada para enfrentarse al mundo. Así que en ese primer juego es lo que vemos una Lara que poco a poco se va construyendo a sí misma, que poco a poco va pudiendo enfrentarse a los desafíos físicos que la van a convertir en Tomb Raider y que lucha por la supervivencia, ¿no? Pero todavía no está preparada para ser lo que va a ser en el futuro. Este tipo de aventuras además se expandieron también a los cómics. Hay una serie de cómics que suceden entre el primer y el segundo juego en el que esa evolución de Lara Croft hacia Tomb Raider pues también se va subrayando, ¿no? A partir de diferentes aventuras que viven. El segundo juego, sin embargo, afronta a una Lara Croft que vive una evolución mucho más sutil, es una evolución interna y no externa. Digamos que los desafíos físicos del primer juego, que marcaron el primer juego y a los que tuvo que enfrentarse, ahora ya puede enfrentarse a ellos. Así que aunque sigue teniendo desafíos, estos desafíos son más desafíos internos de ella misma, ¿no? Pues demonios interiores que tiene que vencer en vez de grandes secuencias de acción, que también las hay, a las que se enfrenta. Y más o menos esto fue, creo que un buen resumen de lo que nos contó Rhianna. Insistió mucho en que los juegos se han hecho para que haya una evolución del personaje, o sea, no simplemente veamos en el primer juego pues que se convierte en Tomb Raider y ya está, sino que a lo largo de los juegos vamos a ir viendo cómo su carácter madura, ¿no? So my second question for you is related in some kind with video game writing, because I think one thing that we haven't speak about is what is the shape of a document when you are writing a video game, because we know how is a script, but I think it's pretty interesting for writers and also general audience to know how you face a video game. Is an spreadsheet in Excel? What is that you have when you are writing the story for work?
I mean, again, it depends on the kind of genre of game that you're working on. I mean, something like Tomb Raider has a core cinematic script that is written much like a movie script. At the moment, software like Final Draft, which is obviously very common in the movie industry, is starting to come in a little bit into games, but the trouble with Final Draft is that everyone that needs to comment on it has to have a copy of Final Draft, so it's an expensive investment for a company. So more often than not, certainly with Tomb Raider, I just made a Word document look like a Final Draft script, so that when you're reading it, it feels like a script, and it feels like a script to the actors, but you can still sort of, comment on it. Everyone has Word, and it can be easily distributed. It's not as nice and neat to work on as something like Final Draft or Fade In, but it does the job. And the central spine of the story in both Tomb Raider games was very much like a movie. It was written, with a 3-act structure. And that's, in more or less in a linear way, at least to start with, and then we keep going back and iterating on things. So something like Tomb Raider has a central spine, and then it's got lots of other narrative elements coming out of it. So you've got the level dialogue, what Lara says as she's moving through the game world, hints, buoying herself up, just generally talking to herself. That's all level dialogue, so that could be done by one writer specifically, it could be done by a number of writers. Then even further than that, you've got secondary narrative, so you've got diaries and tapes and documents and maybe little text that comes up when you find a certain artifact or relic or whatever. Then you've got things like bark dialogue, so what the enemies say when either they're in combat or just chatting to themselves, while you're kind of spying on them or something like that. So there's lots of different branches of narrative. Then of course you've got things like environmental storytelling, which has no words in at all, but probably needs the input of a writer. So just using the place, the placement of bodies, where you find documents, the way the level is built to kind of help tell the story. So there's all these kind of different threads that come off the main narrative spine, even in something like Tomb Raider, which seems like very linear, but in fact has a lot of not branching narrative in the same way that a role-playing game would, like sort of Dragon Age or Mass Effect, but a kind of discoverable narrative for the players, and that's sort of become very important to building the whole world. So usually the things like diaries will also be done in Word, but things like barks will be done in Excel. And I don't like Excel as a writer because it's very unfriendly for writers and unfriendly for actors. It's just very friendly for kind of systems and organisation. So yeah, it's begrudgingly that I use it because I kind of understand its value, but doesn't have a lot of value on the creative end. But that's just kind of the way that the industry tends to work. Some companies have bespoke software that they've developed specifically for writing into their games. I've come across a few companies using things like Artisy to kind of organise their dialogue writing, particularly if it's in lots of kind of bits and more kind of systemic and less cinematic and linear. So there's kind of new things coming in, but honestly, it's quite basic. It's Word and Excel like 80% of the time.
Bueno, pues a ver si doy resumido todos estos detalles lo mejor posible. Lo primero sería que, digamos, en un juego como Lara Croft sí que tienes como un guión cinematográfico parecido al que tienes en una película, con sus secuencias de acción y su narrativa, pero esto solo forma parte de la espina central, al contrario de un guión de cine donde puedes trabajar pues, con programas como Final Draft que te permiten ya estructurar a partir de un modelo de guión cinematográfico todas tus escenas. Aquí estás trabajando un poco con un árbol, ¿no? Tienes una espina central que sería la narrativa central y luego tienes como las diferentes ramas que van contando la historia. Por ejemplo, tienes una rama que se dedica a las cosas que puede decir Lara Croft mientras se está moviendo en el mundo, ¿no? Tienes otra rama que se dedica a los enemigos, a los diálogos que pueden mantener ellos mientras tú te estás moviendo. Tienes otra rama que se dedica a, digamos, la expansión narrativa a través de diarios, documentos que te encuentras, reliquias. Tienes otra rama que está muy de moda en los videojuegos, se le llama environmental storytelling. Esto quiere decir que aunque no hay palabras, pues a través de la arquitectura, de la disposición de los cuerpos, de los escenarios, también cuentas historia, y es otro de los aspectos en los que tener un escritor para un videojuego pues es interesante, ¿no? El problema es que, digamos que todas estas ramas, la mayoría de las veces, Rhianna ha dicho que un 80%, tienes que utilizar Excel para introducir, digamos, el input del escritor. La escritura se hace en Excel. Y ha comentado que esto no le gusta nada, porque a nivel creativo pues no aporta absolutamente nada, pero el Excel es algo, supongo que por la disposición de matrices, que los sistemas entienden muy bien y que pueden coger muy bien, ¿no? Entonces, es digamos, el modelo estándar con el que trabaja la industria, pero no es algo con el que le guste trabajar. Y por último ha comentado que hay cada vez más compañías están desarrollando software para escritores, para hacer este tipo de operaciones pues un poco más amables para el escritor, incluso alejándose de lo que sería el modelo lineal de un guión y utilizando un software que te permita estructurar por listas pues los diferentes aspectos del videojuego. Pero bueno, ha dicho que al final el 80% del trabajo de momento se tiene que hacer en Excel, y eso es lo que hay de momento en la industria.
Okay, so you have to work with several constraints, and you don't have full control of where the story goes, because many times gameplay goes first. So what would you describe as the most challenging part of writing for video games? What is the hardest part for you?
There are a lot of challenges, but I mean, one of the biggest is trying to integrate gameplay and story, and that can be very hard, especially if you're working with very heavy action gameplay that has to have its own pace to be satisfying to the players, and that pace isn't dictated by what might be the preferred pace for the narrative and for the character development. It's kind of it runs very differently. So the needs of narrative and the needs of gameplay and the needs of the players all can be at odds, and it's trying to find a sweet spot that balances all of those needs. And that can be very difficult because particularly action games in the past, and Tomb Raider went from being a bit more platformy and puzzly to being a higher action game with the reboot. And so with those games it can be very difficult to find the quieter moments that kind of tell the story and the character development, because you're constantly kind of under the cosh when it comes to gameplay and keeping the flow going, and you don't want to kind of take the player out of the action too much, and so you're always aware of that. And you're also taking away a central element of what you would normally keep control with your character, because we know that action equals character, except you don't have control of the action, you just have control of the character. So the action is decided by mechanics designers, gameplay level designers are all deciding what the actions are, and you're having to fold that back into the character. But really you're not defining the action based on the character, you're defining the character based on the action, in as much as you can. But it's very difficult with high action gameplay because it's so unique to games. Like Tomb Raider has a very high body count, even compared to like the biggest blockbuster movies. It's got a huge body count, and it's sort of like, how do you accurately fold that back into character? And so that is the kind of big challenge, trying to kind of marry gameplay and character, really.
Bueno, hay muchos desafíos a la hora de escribir para videojuegos, pero quizá uno de los más duros es cómo combinar el gameplay y la jugabilidad con la historia, ¿no? Digamos que aquí se entremezclan tres necesidades distintas a las que hay que intentar satisfacer con un punto de equilibrio. Por un lado es la necesidad del escritor de contar bien la historia, por el otro lado la necesidad de los diseñadores de diseñar el escenario y la jugabilidad, y por otro lado la necesidad del propio jugador de la experiencia que quiere vivir. Entonces encontrar ese equilibrio, especialmente en los juegos de acción, es muy difícil. Y es muy difícil en los juegos de acción porque es difícil encontrar momentos tranquilos en los que uno pueda desarrollar el personaje o avanzar la narrativa. Normalmente siempre se está en la marcha y sufriendo secuencias de acción, y por el otro lado porque la acción no está diseñada en función del personaje, sino que el personaje se diseña en función de la acción. Es decir, la acción la diseñan pues los diseñadores de mecánicas y en general los game designers están diseñando los escenarios de acción, y como guionista tienes que diseñar o entender cómo reaccionaría el personaje a lo que ha diseñado el diseñador. Y claro, en juegos como Tomb Raider la cantidad de muertos con los que acabas el juego es tremenda. También pasa en muchísimas películas que la cantidad de muertos se acumulan, ¿no? Entonces, a veces es muy difícil entender cómo puede el personaje reaccionar a esta orgía de cadáveres, ¿no? O sea, cómo definir la condición psicológica y el desarrollo del personaje en función de lo que está pasando en la acción, ¿no?
Following up on your last answer, there's some sort of balance to be reached between gameplay and story, in terms that if you take away the control of the player away from the player for exposition, cutscenes and all that, then you are in some sort breaking the flow of the game. But if you don't, then you don't have the chance of showing certain elements of character. Like, for example, what you mentioned on the body count. When I finished Uncharted 2, I was amazed because the game informed me that I have killed like 900 people or some sort of ridiculous number. How do you think is best to balance this kind of dilemma? Okay, what do you think is the best way of keeping the story flowing and the gameplay flowing, and at the same time showing internal conflicts and developments of the character without taking away too much control of the play? Where do you think is the sweet spot? Or what would be the best way of achieving it?
I'm not sure we found the best way, to be honest. I mean, different developers and games have taken different tactics. So you mentioned Uncharted. So Uncharted takes the tactic of making Nathan Drake quite affable and funny and kind of making little offhand comments and stuff. He's still killing lots of people, but you kind of like him, so you don't mind too much. With Lara, there was certainly, she reflected on what she was doing and the craziness of what she was doing, and that she was just kind of trying to survive, and she didn't really like doing it, but she knew that that's what she had to do. So we kind of took different tactics, and previously Lara had been more Little Miss Quippy about things, and that's really been a popular way of dealing with it, which is having the character be a bit blasé about what they're doing, which is it is a little bit, it's become a bit of a cliche in games now, and every time I see a movie character acting like that, I thought, oh, it's just like a video game, and once you see it happening in a movie, it feels more, you suddenly realise how kind of weird it is, but we've kind of got used to it in games. I think as gamers we get used to certain aspects that make no sense in any other medium, but we're prepared to accept them in games. So, just being able to heal instantly with a health pack, or crouch down behind a small wall and heal, or be able to, take several arrow shots and still keep on going. And the fact that enemies will telegraph their every movement to you. That's why things like writing Barks is so difficult, because it's for a situation that inherently makes no sense. It makes no sense for enemies to tell you that they're flanking or reloading or moving away or whatever, but because of the nature of games, that becomes the requirement. So there's a kind of a lot of weird challenges in kind of involved in that. I don't know where exactly the sweet spot is. I think because it changes in every battle, and certainly narrative never wins the majority of battles, probably maybe a third of them sometimes. It depends on how important narrative is to the overall gameplay experience, how important character is. And I think between the first Tomb Raider and the second Tomb Raider, we sort of realised that people were paying a lot of attention to how well or how badly we were aligning character and gameplay. And so I think with Rise, we managed to align them a little bit better. And part of that was natural because she was tougher anyway, so she'd been through a few more adventures. So she didn't have to keep reflecting on kind of what she was doing and the kind of craziness and how she felt about it, because she'd been through it before, and you know, she was kind of into a mode, like she was like, right, okay, I know how to deal with this. She was, you know, as I say, was more able to meet fire with fire. So that meant that the gameplay and narrative naturally came closer together. But it felt like a little bit, with certainly the first Tomb Raider, that people were kind of noticing some of the discrepancies between gameplay and narrative in that kind of game, really sort of for the first time. And they'd been happening before, but it sort of felt like because we'd made Lara more human, it kind of highlighted the aspects of gaminess that are kind of not in line with that. And so I think people have been paying a lot more attention to that since. And you know, we don't have all the answers, and you know, there's part of me that thinks that maybe it's actually going right back to the beginning and developing story and character and gameplay all at the same time, and not just prioritizing gameplay without thinking about character at the same time, and thinking about what a character's actions mean. And this is something a writer would do in their script, controlling the action of the character all the time. But when you've got action meaning one thing and kind of character meaning another, and I think that's where you get the problem. So everything needs to be developed at the same time. And you know, if you don't want your character to kind of be a complete psycho or sociopath, don't have them having actions that suggest that they are. Or kind of embrace their kind of mentality and kind of what that would mean. So I think we just need more narrative and influence at the beginning of games development. And writers are often hired too late in the process to really do anything but kind of fold narrative around what's existing. But they need to be there right at the start to help develop gameplay and character at the same time, and you know, gameplay needs to support character and character needs to support gameplay. You can't have, you know, gameplay has always come first, but we're now seeing where the problems that causes. So it basically has to be gameplay and narrative hand in hand at the start.
Pues no creo que hayamos encontrado la solución ideal, ¿no? Tú hablabas de Uncharted, por ejemplo, en Uncharted lo que se hace es que Nathan Drake es un tío muy majo, que es un asesino en serie exactamente igual que cualquier otro personaje de videojuegos, pero es tan majo y tan simpático y hace unos comentarios tan divertidos que un poco te olvidas de ello. La estrategia que seguimos en Tomb Raider fue que Lara Croft reflexionara sobre lo que estaba haciendo y que no le gustara, ¿no? Que fuera una superviviente que se veía obligada a hacer cosas que no le gustaban para nada. Pero bueno, todo esto lo que viene a subrayar es que hay aspectos de los videojuegos que solo tienen sentido dentro de los videojuegos y que son absurdos, como un personaje, digamos, realiza una serie de acciones que no están ligadas a él como personaje. Cuando veo eso en una película, pues digo, esto es como un videojuego, ¿no? Cuando un personaje pues hace cualquier acción o participa con una secuencia de acción haciendo unas cosas que realmente por la psicología del personaje no resultan las lógicas. Y a veces esto nos dificulta pues el escribir. Por ejemplo, cuando tienes que escribir lo que dicen los enemigos resulta muy absurdo porque tienes que encontrar la manera natural de que un enemigo te diga dónde está, que te telegrafíe su posición, cosa que parece bastante estúpida si estuvieras en el mundo real. Después tienes pues otros momentos como que te tomas un pack digamos de salud y ya automáticamente estás otra vez bien, puedes sobrevivir a 7 disparos de flechas. En los videojuegos pasan todas estas cosas muy absurdas, ¿no? Y esto viene a subrayar otra cosa que había comentado antes, y es que creo que la narrativa y el diseño tienen que ir a la vez, porque lo que pasa es que cada batalla es distinta, cada batalla a lo que nos enfrentamos en el juego es distinta y entonces el guionista tiene que hacer ajustes en base a algo que ya se encuentra desde el principio. Y esto hace muy difícil el trabajo del escritor. Si el escritor estuviera desde el principio, pues digamos que la narrativa y la jugabilidad podrían ir de la mano. Y una de las cosas curiosas que nos pasó con el primer Tomb Raider es que al hacer el personaje más realista, más humano, empático y con emociones, la gente se dio cuenta, mucho más que en anteriores títulos de Tomb Raider, de dónde estaba la trampa del juego. Y surgieron muchos artículos, esto lo comento yo aparte, yo recuerdo por ejemplo uno de Polygon magnífico sobre este tema, en el que se decía que había una discrepancia muy clara entre la personalidad de Lara Croft y el hecho de que matara a tanta gente de una forma tan horrible, ¿no? Que es parte de la mecánica del juego. Entonces, bueno, no tenemos todas las respuestas a estas preguntas que todavía se están haciendo en videojuegos de cómo podemos solucionar esto, pero que los guionistas estén desde el principio y no lleguen demasiado tarde en el proceso, pues puede ser una de las claves, ¿no? So my next question for you is, you have a background in journalism previous to your career as a writer in games and comics, etc. And I want to know that if being a journalist and have this, in-depth look of video games or pop culture helped you to your career as a creator, because you have a more deep, full insight from an outside perspective in what games are and reflecting in how they could be in the future?
I think it helped me in a number of ways. Just building up contacts within the industry was probably very important, but also being able to kind of break down a game and examine its different facets and how well they were working. And also get a kind of look into how games were put together, how the different teams work together, and how thinking about how well or how badly it was kind of going, because you were seeing the game through development in a way that you're not privy to with movies and movie reviewing. You don't get really often to kind of go on set and see the movie whilst it's being made. But with kind of games journalism, because the PR for them is so long and goes over several years, you get to go and see behind the scenes when the game is being developed. You get to kind of write previews and see how it's all coming together. So I think journalism was very important for that reason. But there's still part of me that feels like a journalist. Like I feel that every time I kind of go to a development studio and I feel like I'm going to interview people, and then, for some remarkable reason, I'm let into the inner sanctum, allowed to know all the secrets. So there is part of me that has that kind of journalistic excitement of kind of going into a new developer and seeing what they're doing, and that's kind of still very exciting and kind of remarkable to me, and I'm still amazed that I'm kind of allowed to know all the secrets and things like that.
Pues le pregunté si, digamos, su background, porque ella fue periodista pues para varios medios especializados, pero también para periódicos como The Guardian, fue periodista de videojuegos antes de ser escritora, y eso le había ayudado de alguna manera en su carrera creativa. Ella me dijo que sí, para empezar, los contactos que tienes en la industria, ¿no? Eso es una de las cosas más importantes, pero también la capacidad de ver un videojuego en todas sus facetas, ¿no? El periodismo de videojuegos tiene una diferencia muy clara, pues a lo mejor con lo que es cubrir la producción de una película, y es que estás viendo entre bambalinas todo el proceso durante mucho tiempo. En una película es raro, pues alguna vez te puedes pasar un par de días en un rodaje, pero es raro que tengas esa posibilidad de viajar a un estudio e ir viendo cómo un juego se va desarrollando en todas sus facetas, digamos, durante años. Escribes las previews, entrevistas a toda esa gente, ves cómo va cambiando el juego. Y una de las cosas divertidas que me pasa es que no dejo de pensar en mí como una periodista, y entonces esto me resulta muy gracioso, porque cuando estoy en una habitación con los diseñadores y me están contando cosas que nunca me contarían como periodista, porque no soy la periodista, soy la guionista, pues me siento todavía como si fuera la periodista y en realidad hubiera conseguido de alguna manera colarme en el santuario de esos videojuegos y que me revelaran todos sus secretos, ¿no? Y es algo que me gusta y que me resulta, pues eso, divertido.
Okay, following up with Angel's question, given your experience both as a writer inside the game studios and as a journalist reporting on the games that come out, where would you like to see video games go in terms of story? What would you like to see in the future for video games? How would you like for video games to change?
I'd like to see there being more imagination and creativity when it comes to mechanics in video games. You know, we certainly in the AAA space we have possibly an over-reliance on very hyper-violent gameplay. And you know, I've loved those games and I've enjoyed those games, but God, it is hard to kind of write a story and character arcs against that kind of gameplay. It's not impossible, but it does limit things. And I would like to see us exploring kind of new mechanics and more new verbs for interacting with the world rather than shooting. And it's not because I don't enjoy it. It's because I want to see kind of just new ways of kind of moving through the world and interacting. Like, for example, in Beyond Good and Evil, sort of the way they use photography in that, or something like Fatal Frame, where you didn't sort of shoot the ghosts, you had to take pictures of them instead. And although that had the same effect, more or less, as kind of shooting them, it gave a whole new feeling to the world because of those mechanics and that way of interacting with the world. And I do think we kind of rely a lot on violent gameplay, and that can be fun, but I think we've got to kind of move on and we've got to keep evolving and we've got to find new ways of interacting to the world and showing our characters through their actions and have their actions be more than just shooting the next person they come across. And I'm saying this as someone that's worked on a lot of games where their characters have shot the next person they come across, but that's kind of what I would like to see, just because more imagination and creativity coming through from the mechanics side of things. And I'd like to see AAA taking more risks with theme. We're getting a lot of kind of great themes and personal stories coming up from the indie space. It's not so much from the AAA space that we're still very reliant on the kind of blockbuster style games, and those can be fun, but I want to see what the next kind of Bioshock is going to be, something that kind of really shakes up theme and creativity and world building, and it feels like we haven't seen that yet. There's been sort of little evolutions and there's some interesting worlds developed, but it's still very risk averse in the AAA industry, and we still like our big blockbuster, high action, high octane games that are telling kind of big blustery stories. And I guess The Last of Us was probably more of a kind of a personal story, and that was very interesting because it was a kind of parental story. But then we started getting a few more kind of father stories coming through, but we're still seeming a way off before we get mother stories coming through. And I just want to see us exploring more kind of diversity of theme, I think, as much as anything else. We talk about diversity a lot in games, and often it gets reduced to put more women in it. And actually diversity is about ethnicity and age and ability and experience, and it should involve theme as well, I believe. So that's kind of what I would like to see, I think.
Bueno, pues lo que me gustaría ver es mucha más creatividad e imaginación en los que son las mecánicas de los videojuegos. Que sus verbos evolucionen, porque el verbo que más se repite en un videojuego es el de disparar, ¿no? Me gustaría ver que exploramos otras formas de interactuar con el mundo, especialmente en los juegos AAA, porque los juegos AAA, aunque pueden ser muy divertidos, no dejan de ser siempre el mismo modelo. orientados a la acción, hiperviolentos, historias, digamos, epopélicas, de grandísimo espectáculo y una cantidad de temas muy limitada, ¿no? Creo que desde el mundillo indie es desde donde estamos viendo pues, una mayor evolución en los temas que se tratan y también en las interacciones que puedes realizar. Y recuerda una, creo que dijo el videojuego de Fatal Frame, que digamos que tu interacción se hacía a través de una cámara fotográfica y eso permitía, a pesar de que el efecto pudiera pensarse que era el mismo que el de matar, pero con otra cosa, se sentía muy distinto por el hecho de que fuera una cámara fotográfica y le gustaría ver más creatividad en ese aspecto. Y cree que en los juegos AAA quizá se han visto pequeñas evoluciones, cita como un ejemplo de una buena historia que no está, digamos, tan atada por el espectáculo de Last of Us, que es una historia de paternidad, pero también dice que pues, faltan muchas, ¿no? Pues, ¿por qué no contamos en los AAA una historia de maternidad? ¿Por qué no exploramos más diversidad tanto en la construcción del mundo como en el tema que estamos tratando? Esto ocurre porque evidentemente la industria es tiene mucha aversión al riesgo en estos productos. Hay que recordar que estos juegos pues, cuestan lo mismo que una gran película y a veces más. Destiny, el presupuesto se fija en 500 millones de dólares, ¿no? Entonces, eso sería su deseo, ¿no? El tener la oportunidad de que los juegos AAA exploraran unas mecánicas con las que interactuar por el mundo que fueran más allá de matar, ¿no? Le pregunta al público, ¿no? Sí. Pues ahora os damos a vosotros la oportunidad de preguntarle a Rhianna las dudas que tengáis. So, Rhianna, we are going to open the questions for the audience.
Good morning, Rhianna. Two questions. When you make an adaptation of some other history, like a movie, like a book, how you can translate the voice of the writer in a video game? And it's maybe easy to write sense of humor, but how do you make sense of humor in a video game?
To your first question, I've never adapted a book into a video game, and there haven't been that many examples of books into video games that have been that successful. Obviously, the Discworld ones are quite a long time ago, and I think they worked well. We haven't seen that many. I think there was a Pern game at one point that didn't come out. I think there may have been a Ringworld game that was around, but none of them have really sort of set the world on fire. Movies into games have tended to work better because the games can kind of typify the action elements of the movie, and sometimes they actually work better because they're putting you in the shoes of Spider-Man, and you can get a real sense of the fun of slinging webs across cities, and or being the Hulk and smashing things up. I think it can really capture a certain kind of action and feeling of stepping into the shoes of a character. I mean, when it comes to adapting a book into movie or TV, I mean, it really is what you cut out and how you sew everything back together again, and how you turn internal voice into external action tends to be the big challenge. So with something like We Free Men, for example, which I'm adapting at the moment, a lot of the book is in Tiffany. A lot of the story is in Tiffany's head, and her thoughts, her first thoughts, and her second thoughts, and sometimes her third thoughts. So you have to find a way, because the kind of movie industry tends to be a little bit hesitant about having lots of internal VO. It's not necessarily seen as a good thing unless it's really integral for the style of the movie. So you have to find ways of turning those internal thoughts into external conversations or external actions. And so it's finding a way of doing that feels in keeping with the world. And as I say, the bits you have to cut out, because you will have to cut things out. Taking a 300, 400 page book and turning it into a 100-page screenplay, you'll have to cut things out. I mean, you'll have to sew it and sew it back up again, and sort of understanding the nature of the world and kind of how that's put together, and the spirit of the world, and capturing the spirit of the world is probably the kind of the essential requirements when adapting to screen. So I would assume that would be the same for games. It would be turning those internal conversations into external actions in particular. With humour in games, I think with Overlord, what helped make them successful was it wasn't just about script, it was about everything coming together to kind of make the world funny. So it was about the animation and the level design and the voice acting and the music all coming together. It wasn't a game with a funny script on top. It was actually a game that was sort of built from the ground up to have humour in it. So I think that's the kind of key, is kind of building a world that supports that humour, and not just sort of trying to kind of drop the humour in on top, which can work, but I think, you know, building it from the ground up was what made Overlord successful.
Bueno, pues con respecto a la primera pregunta, que era cómo, digamos, cómo se adaptaba a un libro, cómo adaptar un libro y mantener la voz del escritor a un videojuego, bueno, ella comentó que nunca lo ha hecho, nunca ha adaptado un libro a un videojuego y que cree que realmente es algo que no se hace tan a menudo, ¿no? Hay ejemplos como por ejemplo Mundo Anillo, en el que se ha intentado, pero que no hay tampoco ningún ejemplo que pueda pensar ahora mismo que haya, digamos, asombrado al mundo de adaptación del libro directa al videojuego. De lo que sí que puede hablar es de cómo adaptar un libro a una película. And Rhianna, the name of the book that you are adapting right now is?
We Free Men.
We Free Men. Ahora está adaptando este libro de Tiffany.
Yeah. So it's one of my dad's books. So it's the first of the Tiffany A. King series. So that starts with We Free Men, and Tiffany is the heroine of the We Free Men books.
Pues está adaptando este libro a una película y entonces básicamente si hubiera que centrarlo en una idea, lo que hay que convertir son las acciones internas de los personajes, que ya sabéis que las novelas son constantes, los monólogos interiores, etcétera, etcétera, en acciones externas. Eso y cortar muchas cosas, porque tienes que cargarte muchas páginas para que un libro, pues eso, de 300, 400 páginas quepan en un guión de 100. Entonces, si hubiera que fabular cómo sería el adaptar, el hacer el mismo proceso para un videojuego, pues sería algo parecido. Sería coger las acciones internas y convertirlas en externas, en algo que fuera en este caso jugable, y cortar, no tendrías que cortar tanto, ¿no?, en un videojuego. Y después el tema del sentido del humor, pues ella cree que la base, como dijo antes, que los escritores tenían que estar en el principio, es que todo vaya al unísono, ¿no? Que lo ideal no es pegarle el humor encima a un juego con un guión brillante y muy divertido, sino que todo el mundo tiene que transmitir ese sentido del humor, desde las animaciones, el diseño de niveles, la estética, todo tiene que ir en consonancia para transmitir ese sentido del humor. Lo otro, lo de pegárselo al final, puede funcionar, pero probablemente lo mejor es que el mundo esté construido desde el principio, desde el punto de vista que quieres que tenga sentido del humor. Siguiente pregunta.
Morning, Rhianna. Okay, so the question is, as a video game writer, how you feel, or what do you think about that kind of players, gamers, who says, I don't need a story on my video game. I don't need a plot. I don't need those cinematics. I don't need all that stuff. I just want to do things. I just want to move my character. All that kind of players, like Minecraft, League of Legends players, who doesn't actually need a history or doesn't want to play a story or a plot.
I mean, that's fine. You know, I mean, even those kind of games have some narrative component in them, even if it isn't, you know, the way that The Last of Us would, or Tomb Raider, or Uncharted. Yeah, League of Legends still pays a lot of attention to its characters. And particularly the visual design of its characters, and you know that's been quite appealing for players, and there's been a lot of fan fiction generated, and the same with Overwatch as well. You know that. So that there usually is in most games there usually is some kind of narrative. It's just not overt. So even with the kind of most action-heavy games, there's still something to kind of glue that action together and make that action make sense within the context of the world. But you know, not every game requires a story, but you know, Tetris does fine without a story, but there's usually, most games have some kind of narrative element, but it's often, you know, quite subtle. I mean, if you look at Minecraft, you know, we've got Minecraft Story Mode, which Telltale are doing, so there is a desire, even in the Minecraft world, for there to be kind of narrative involved in it. So I think, yeah, I mean, when we tend to think about game writing, we tend to think about words, but actually what kind of game writers and narrative designers do is much more world building and character building and kind of invisible work behind the scenes that's not, you know, the kind of shiny cutscenes, but is just about developing character and character visuals and the background to the world that is still narrative, but it's just not overt narrative in the same way cinematic games would. So I mean, I think it's fine for players to feel that way, but the games they probably like have some narrative element. It's just not big story stuff, but it is glue holding things together, I think.
Bueno, pues realmente en cualquier videojuego, incluso los que has mencionado, como el League of Legends, antes recordar que la pregunta estaba relacionada pues con estos jugadores que dicen que no quieren una historia dentro de su juego, que no quieren tener una historia, que no quieren ver intros y que quieren simplemente jugar, ¿no? Entonces la respuesta de Rhianna es que incluso en juegos como League of Legends o Overwatch hay un trabajo narrativo. A lo mejor no es un trabajo narrativo que veas o que esté relacionado con una historia que vas siguiendo, pero hay un trabajo narrativo en el diseño de los personajes, en el diseño del mundo, en, digamos, la narración invisible que hace que todo ese conjunto tenga sentido, ¿no? Entonces, para ella es perfectamente válido que un jugador pues, pueda preferir un tipo de juego que no cuenta una historia en el sentido tradicional, pero incluso cuando no le cuentan una historia en el sentido tradicional, están recibiendo información narrativa en muchísimos aspectos, estéticos o caracterización de personajes o en las animaciones, ahí hay información narrativa. Y en el caso de Minecraft es un buen ejemplo precisamente porque Minecraft ha tenido el deseo de expandirse como narración y por eso tenemos el modo historia, por así decirlo, de Minecraft que ha desarrollado Telltale. Entonces, nada, Rhianna ha insistido en eso, en el que los escritores, muchas veces el trabajo que están haciendo para videojuegos, no hay que pensarlo como palabras o como palabras que vaya a ver el jugador, pero sí como un trabajo de diseño detrás de la estética del mundo, de la coherencia del mundo y de la personalidad de los personajes, y en eso sí que hay un trabajo, aunque no sea visible. Bueno, pues hemos llegado hasta aquí, así que yo creo que es el momento de darle un enorme aplauso a Rhianna y las gracias por estar con todos nosotros.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.